So we're going to make a cut on this sliding compound miter saw. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark on our board where we wish to cut. I'm going to use this speed square to make a nice square line to mark my cut. When I'm cutting with the miter saw, I want to be aware of the kerf, or the material that will be removed. So in reality, when the saw cuts, it's going to abrade away a slot. So I need to account for that when I set out my measurements for this saw. On this particular saw, there's a laser that projects where the side of the blade is going to land. The first time you use a saw, you want to bring the blade down and see where that laser falls. So in this case, the laser actually shows me the right side of the blade. Some saws use a laser, some use a shadow, and some don't have any form of visual guidance other than the blade itself. Once you confirm where you want your cut to land, ensure that you have your safety glasses and hearing protection on. Up here on the handle, we can see the start switch for the saw itself. There's a pull trigger on the back side, and this little button I'm going to press in with my thumb at the same time to engage the saw. Both of these have to be compressed in order for the saw to start. Whenever I'm cutting, I want to ensure that my material is pressed firmly against the fence. The fence is the back component of this. And I also want to make sure it's pressed firmly against the table. If my board has any sort of warps or deformities, I want to turn it in such a way that the most straight and flat sides are pressed against these back fence and bases. So I'm going to hold my board down securely. I want to make sure that my hand is outside of the danger zone, which is 1 hand width of the blade, so I'm going to be well back here. I'm going to pull down the trigger, guide down through the cut nice and slow. At the end of the cut, I'm going to stop, pause, and wait for the blade to stop completely. At the bottom of my cut, I'm waiting and letting the saw blade stop completely, so that way I don't eject the small piece that I've cut into the back of the saw or back at me. This is pretty common with small pieces of material and cutting too quickly. The rotation of that blade can lift that small piece up and send it in a direction you don't desire to send it. So with any cut, you want to take it nice and slow, let the saw do the work, and at the bottom of the cut, stop, wait for the blade to stop completely. It's also helpful so you don't lose the piece you were trying to make in the first place. All right, so in addition to making sure that our hands are supporting the material 1 hand width away from the slot in the middle of the saw, we also want to make sure that we're not setting up for an accident in other circumstances. So making sure that you're never holding the material in such a way that you've crossed your arms in front of the blade and you've exposed yourself to unnecessary risk. A really common mistake that we see students attempt occasionally is trying to cut a slit along the middle of a board in this orientation and trying to sort of hold this. The saw will grab the material, it will pull it into the back of the saw, can very well pull your hand into the blade. So the table saw would be the correct tool, or the bandsaw would be the correct tool to make this cut in this orientation. Don't try to do it with the miter saw. Make sure that you are not leaning too far forward when you're making your cut. You don't want to fall into the tool. Make sure that the floor is not covered in sawdust and you have a clear, slip-free environment to stand in. Just make sure that you're careful and avoiding any opportunity to accidentally slip, trip, or fall into the blade while you're making a cut.
Before making any cuts on this saw, consider the size of your material and the shape of your material. What's going to be safe is having a piece of material that is fully supported on both sides by the fence. This is not safe because as I cut through, the saw blade is going to pull this area that's not supported and both pieces of material into the fence and kick it out and cause damage to your material and possibly shoot it back at you. The same is going to be for a shape like this. You can see this board right here is curved. For a safe cut, I would want to place the flat edge against the fence right here. Now, Both sides are fully supported, and it's going to keep me safe in my material safe and get a nice clean cut. These smaller pieces right here, these are definitely a problem. These are a problem because really there is not a safe place where you can put your hands to hold on to that to make your cut without putting yourself in danger. So in that situation, we would want to find a different saw to make these cuts, or you would want to talk to one of the technicians or monitors about possible what we call jigs or other tools that could help you to make the cuts you need to make.
In certain situations, you may want to use a clamp to secure your material to the miter saw. You can see here the clamp is being inserted into the back side of the fence. The knobs are being adjusted to loosen, tighten, and secure the material to the tabletop. Once it's secure, you're then ready to make your cut. As described in the previous section, sometimes certain shapes or sizes can be difficult to cut. A clamp allows us to secure a material down and make the cut while keeping our hand away from the cutting area or the material. Ultimately, you can hold the material more tightly with a clamp than you could with your hand.
If you need to cut a piece of material that is wider than what this saw can currently cut, something such as this small piece of plywood, you can see when I bring the saw down, it's really only going to cut half of this, this piece of wood. So, back at the end of these rails, there is a small pin that can be pulled out, turn 90 degrees, and drop back in. This has now unlocked the sliding mechanism of this saw, and now the blade has an action to it that allows it to come to the front and go back. So now we have more than doubled the size or width of piece of wood that we can cut with this tool.
If you're wanting to make the exact same cut many times, a stop is a very simple method and setup to do so. You can see here we took our measurement with the speed square and are now checking it with the saw blade. Once we have it, leave your material in place and bring a scrap piece of wood up to its end and secure it to the fence. In this case, we're using a squeeze clamp, and it could be any other number of clamps available in the shop. Now that it's secure, we can use that as a stop to bring our wood to every time to get the same exact measurement. As always when using a miter saw, be sure to let the blade come to a complete stop before bringing it up. You can see here the finger was used to hold that material down after the blade had come to a stop. This is important because if you don't do that, the blade's teeth, when brought up, can cause the material that's trapped between the blade and the stop to kick and cause your stop to move, ultimately messing up your measurements. Here you can see it slightly moves, could have been worse, but either way, we got the same cut 3 times over. Here we're going to show you how to make adjustments on the saws found in the Sam Fox School shops. Notice we have 2 different brands. How you make adjustments will be different depending on what saw you're using. Miter cuts on the Walker Shop Makita miter saw should be made by first loosening the knob in front, pressing down with your thumb, and sliding the table left or right depending on which way you want to miter. Tighten the knob before cutting. In the given shop, you will find 2 different models of a DEWALT miter saw. The first one can be adjusted by pulling up with your fingers on the bottom lever and sliding the tabletop to the angle you want your cut. Once in place, release the lever and you're ready to cut. The second miter saw in givens can be adjusted by pressing down on the thumb button, moving left or right to your desired degree of cut, and once in place, pressing down on the lever to lock the table. After your cut, unlock and return to 0. Unlock and loosen the knob in the front of the Makita saw. Press down on the button in the back located next to the degree gauge. Lean the saw to the desired angle of your cut. Lock the knob back in place, and you're now ready to cut. To make this same adjustment on a DEWALT saw, loosen the knob and back, pull the locking pin, lean the saw to the desired angle, and turn the knob to lock it back in place. Before making the cut, you should check its path to make sure it's clear and there's nothing obstructing. Here you can see the aluminum fence is in the way, so by loosening the fence, pulling it to the side, we can now make a nice, clean, clear cut. Want to use the sliding mechanism of the miter saw to cut wider material, reach to the back, unlock the pin, and now the saw will be free to move from front to back. If the sliding action is not needed for your cut, leave it locked in place. Allowing it to slide is just another variable that can potentially cause complications to your cut. And when you're finished using the saw, don't forget to set all your adjustments back to 0 and lock the saw in place. This will leave it ready for the next person.